Your nose, it does not the text is here.
So read one.
Καλησπέρα, μ' ακούτε? Dear colleagues, dear friends here and online, thank you for being here for tonight's lecture by Lindy Crew. Lindy took a complex path to come to Cyprus, which brought her from Australia and over the UK to the island. Lindy has studied archaeology in La Trobe University in Melbourne, but then went on to Edinburgh, where she completed her PhD with a thesis entitled Social Complexity and Ceramic Technology on Late Bronze Age Cyprus, the New Evidence from Encomi. This was done under the guidance of Eddie Peltenbrook, which was surely an enormous privilege. The PhD was later published as a book with the title Early Encomi, Regionalism, Trade and Society at the Beginning of the Late Bronze Age on Cyprus, which since forms an indispensable part of our bibliographical corpus on Encomi. From 1989 to 1997, Lindy worked in Sydney as a graphic designer for newspapers and magazines, which I'm sure must be very handy when one prepares presentations and publications. From 2004 to 2005, she taught as part-time as sessional lecturer in archaeology at the Universities of Edinburgh, Reading, and Manchester. From 2005 to 2006, she served as a curator in the Department of Greek and Roman Antiquities in the British Museum, working for the database of Cypriot antiquities we all know and use. From 2006 and until 2009, Lindy was British Academy Reckitt postdoctoral fellow at the University of Manchester. And it was at Manchester that she took her first teaching position as a lecturer in archaeology in 2009, offering to graduates and undergraduates a variety of courses such as Introduction to World Archaeology, Changing Worlds in the Near East and the Mediterranean, Feasting and Crafting in the Eastern Mediterranean, Archaeologies of the Past, Present and Future, Archaeology and Society in the Near East and Eastern Mediterranean, Producing and Consuming Heritage, Archaeologies of Identity, and many others. I just listed some very interesting titles. From 2009 to 2013, she also served as a research fellow of the Manchester Museum. In these same years, she held several leadership roles in her university, such as director of the postgraduate program, assistant undergraduate director for academic advising and employability for the School of Arts, Languages and Cultures, chair of the University Research Ethics Committee, research coordinator in archaeology, and many others. I do not know if all these burdens were the only reason, but in 2017, Lindy chose to leave Manchester for Cyprus on a new mission, the directorship of the Cyprus American Archaeological Research Institute, in which I will return in a few seconds. Lindy has extensively excavated on the island, starting already in 2001 as a field director in the University of Edinburgh, excavations at the Chalcolithic Cemetery of Souskiou Laona, another important site of her research, besides Encomi. There, she was trained by the best, Eddie Peltenbrook and Diane Bolger. Since 2007 and until today, she directs excavations of Kisoner Gaskalia, the third most important site for her on the island. And I had not really realized that it's almost 20 years now that you excavate there. Other than the book on early Encomi, she has also published a monograph on spindle whorls, a study of form, function, and decoration in prehistoric Bronze Age Cyprus, and has co-edited 3 volumes on the figurines from Souskiou in 2019, a firstly for Harrison South, and most recently the conference proceedings Empire and Excavation, Critical Perspectives on Archaeology in British Period Cyprus, a major contribution to the field. Her papers in journals, edited volumes, and conference proceedings are of a substantial number. I count 3 papers just in 2025. They encompass a wide range of subjects, periods, sites, and materials, ranging from pre-pottery Neolithic through the Late Bronze Age, From pottery styles and technologies such as red lustrous wares and the bichrome wheel-made wares, to burial rites, the importance of feasting in ancient Cyprus, picrolite and terracotta figurines, climatic changes and their impact on ancient societies, regionalism, chronological problems of archaeological context, the historiography of Cypriot archaeology, and many others. Among her many duties and responsibilities, I will only mention that she served as a committee member and honorary fellow, honorary editor for the Levant monograph series, is a reviewer for the journals Antiquity, Bulletin of the American Schools of Oriental Research, Journal of Archaeological Science, Radiocarbon, American Journal of Archaeology, and for proposals submitted to NSF of the USA. She's also a fellow of the UK Higher Education Academy and the Senior Research Affiliate in the Science and Technology in Archaeology and Cultural Research Center of the Cyprus Institute, as well as a member of ASOR Committee on Archaeological Research and Policy. In 2012, Lindy's discoveries in Cyprus hit the news when she excavated a Bronze Age microbrewery at Chrysonegra Skallia, and for obvious reasons, this was on air in newspapers, in various channels of the BBC World Service, in Antenna Cyprus, and in the Telegraph, the Huffington Post, and the Washington Post. As I mentioned before, when we speak about Lindy these days, we inevitably get to speak for Kari as well. We hope that this will continue to be the situation for many years to come, or for as many as she herself wishes. In the last half of a century, Kari has done so much to support and promote Cypriot archaeology through dialogue and communication, and I sincerely hope that the special relationship between Kari and the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus will continue. So to many more years. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yorgo, for your very kind introduction, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. So this evening, I am going to talk about whether the evidence from the Chalcolithic at Chrysonegra Mosfilia and the Bronze Age at Chrysonegra Skallia might be able to illuminate the processes of transition between these two periods and the intervening and overlapping filial phase. And then I will take a look at the longer view over the early Middle Cypriot until the transition to the late Cypriot, when people appeared to leave Chrysonegra for a couple of centuries at least. And I will be considering these issues framed around whether we can see connections between people of Chrysonegra and other regions of Cyprus, and indeed other areas of the Eastern Mediterranean. So we're going to be looking at which of the transformations that occurred between the Chalcolithic and the Bronze Age can we see at Chrysonegra. And I will shortly outline what these transformations were. Thinking about whether we can obtain a nuanced understanding of these developments through time, and this has been one of our problems with understanding these transitions. Evidence is quite poorly preserved. We have a reliance on tombs and very little stratified material, creating the appearance of a homogeneous horizon, with little in the way of internal development visible. Although the recent PhD of Raphael Lautari has made excellent inroads into understanding variability during the filial using legacy data. And are the people living at Skallia the descendants of those living at Mosfilia? And I have to say that this has been one of my assumptions since I began work at the site, and whilst I can't really substantiate this, I think that it is extremely likely, as we will explore. And what is the evidence for local resource exploitation and for interactions with other communities by land and by sea? So looking at Chrysonegra within its environment and the resources that appear through time, we might be able to examine these issues. So what do we know of Chalcolithic to Bronze Age settlement? And quite frankly, not nearly enough. Here we have Chrysonegra located down with Lemba and Chloricas in the Lemba cluster of sites with Middle and Late Chalcolithic occupation, and sites further to the east of the island. We can also see there's various Late Chalcolithic scatters about. Here, in contrast, in the north and into the Ovgos River Valley is considered the filial heartland. We have the important cemeteries of Vasilia, we have the Ovgos Valley sites, small test trench at Kira, tombs at Filia, into Denia, and then leading into the centre of the island at Markiolonia, where the basal foundation strata was of Filia date. So coming in a little bit closer to look at the Kasonaga immediate environment. And I just want to highlight the area in which the sites lie and the immediate resources at the disposal of the Kasonaga communities. Kasonaga, Mosfilia and Scalia, located down here in this oval. Just for a reference, Mar Pelé Castro is located up in this area. And here, and this is an interesting snapshot, May 2025, that we can see the Mavro-Columbus Dam is actually empty as it was being repaired at this time. But this is our most important waterway leading from the Troodos down to the coast. The alluvial fan that here is held to be medieval in date, but perhaps this requires a little bit of investigation. But important for our purposes, Kasonaga, Mosfilia, Scalia, 300 meters from the sea, 5 kilometers up to the Mavro-Columbus River, up through the river valley to get to the Mamonia terrain, the geological source that we believe the Kasonaga people are making their clay from the late Chalcolithic period. So, and if we're also thinking about that at this period when copper prospecting is really kicking off, that Kasonaga might have been attracting attention, we do know from work at Mar that there are small copper outcrops in this area, and perhaps some of the early prospectors had imagined that it was more extensive than it was actually the case. Coming in a little bit closer to the view of the village. And you can see here we are in the bottommost circle there, Kasonaga, Scalia. Slightly higher up in the oval with the green square is the roofed area of Kasonaga Mosfilia open to the public. And just for reference, in the red circle is the village church. And you can see we really are sandwiched between an expanding village and an expanding coastal tourist zone. You can get a greater sense of this landscape from this 1963 aerial shot. In 1973 to 1974, there was an extensive program of terracing for land consolidation for agricultural purposes in the area. And this cut and revealed all the archaeological sites. Sophocles Hadjisalvas, who's here with us this evening, noted in 1975 that this area of Mosfilia and Scalia was larger than the modern village. And here we have 2 watercourses. The northernmost one, the Scotina, is held to be perennial in prehistory, the lower one probably seasonal, but the red rectangle there, Kasonaga Scalia, located on this little plateau on a gentle slope leading down to the sea, 300 meters hence, with these 2 small inlets into which you could presumably pull small boats. So now, just a little bit more of a Kasonaga village view. Area A here, Kasonaga Maluthia, with the important Neolithic wells and Chalcolithic settlement components located here and further north off the image. And the wiggly lines around area B and C is where Eddie Peltenberg's team at Kasonaga Mosfilia had surveyed evidence of Chalcolithic remains, B in the top area, and Bronze Age remains, C in the lower area. So you can see that according to this, Kasonaga Scalia should definitely be overlying Kasonaga Mosfilia. And just the purple dots I had put here was for highlighting illegally built structures at this time in 2008 in the agricultural zone. This point is now moot as the zoning has been changed and building is permitted in all this area. But there is apparently an obvious overlap between Mosfilia and Scalia. So let's talk about what these filial transformations are. And perhaps most importantly, the move from living in single-celled roundhouses to multi-roomed rectilinear structures. And this is fundamental. The community's identity is going to be very tied up in their type of house, how they interact with their neighbors, their family members. So this is a very radical change. And the move from intramural to extramural cemeteries. And you can see here in the picture of Lemba, a series of pit graves dug around the houses there. And also the introduction of chamber tombs. Rare intramural pot burials occur at Kasonaga Mosfilia and at Machialonia. And we have settlement shift and change in curation discard strategies. Kasonaga is the only area where we do have continuity from Chalcolithic to Bronze Age. Everywhere else, the Chalcolithic sites are abandoned and new Bronze Age establishments are made. Chalcolithic people seem to have quite often closed off and abandoned their houses with full complement of material culture within. Bronze Age people seem to have done a good clear out of usable items before they left. And we have new food preparation. You can see these examples from Marquis. these cooking pots, direct heat boiling vessels associated with new halves, with hobs, sometimes built in like you see here, and sometimes movable. And more transformations carry on. We have the introduction of new fauna. We have screwhorn goats, donkeys, cattle, probably woolly sheep, and associated secondary products revolution may or may not have already been in place. And the cattle plough complex is enabling greater land clearance, exploitation of mountainous soils, and clearly a very important aspect of these changes. We have new textile technologies, spindle wells, loom weights indicating the introduction of the warp-weighted loom, and I'll return to textiles shortly. And we have the first use of indigenous copper for casting weapons and tools, and some imported bronze examples. And new types of personal ornaments, such as you see here in these annular pendants. So all of this is occurring within the international milieu of the Anatolian trade network, where we see precocious Anatolian metal traders engaging with Aegean communities, Anatolian communities, Cypriot communities, and Levantine communities. So the period that overlaps with the late Chalcolithic to some extent, we know the Filia, but thanks to the work of Franklin Webb at Marquis, we know that the proper, fully formed early Bronze Age follows the Filia phase. The Filia pottery is distinctive. You can see new styles and new technologies. We have these shiny red pottery surfaces, and Maria de Comito Eliadu's work has shown that the majority is manufactured in the Filia heartland and transported around the island. But other local variants are also produced. Importantly, this is manufactured from calcareous clays, often with incised decoration, filled with white lime paste to create this contrasting effect. And it's not only the style, the technology, the plug-through handle comes in now, where on closed vessels, the end of the handle is pushed through the wall of the vessel to create a really secure, stable handle. So coming to Chrysonomos Filia, you can see here we have 3 periods highlighted. Phases of the Middle Chalcolithic, phases of the Late Chalcolithic, and period 5, which is the Filia. And the site was occupied from the Aceramic Neolithic, but it is the evidence from the Chalcolithic that is mainly extant, and the plan shows a series of Middle and Late Chalcolithic roundhouses. And I mentioned earlier that this extensive machine terracing of the landscape in the 1970s means that the majority of Filia deposits are highly disturbed by ploughing. And I would also like to note, of course, at this point that I am relying heavily on Eddie Peltenberg's publication on the site, and remain grateful to Eddie for taking me on as a PhD student, involving me in the 1999 Western Cyprus survey, and thereby introducing me to Chrysonomos Filia, as well as all his support up until his untimely death. And there are 2 other people live in this audience who have also been instrumental in developing our understanding of this period. Diane Bolger for her research on the pottery of Chrysonomos Filia and her ongoing wider interpretations of Chalcolithic society, and Jenny Webb, who along with David Frankel investigated the Filia thoroughly from the Bronze Age side as a result of their excavations at Marquis, and I was also fortunate to participate in that as an undergraduate. So Chrysonomos Filia, period 4. Shown here is building 3, known as the Pithos House. It's an important large structure destroyed by fire with the full complement of objects within, and later the much smaller building 86 constructed on top of it. These are both important areas for novel goods and technologies such as fines, beads and metalworking. And you can see in this period 4, we do have 51 sherds of red polished Filia, 1 sherd of black stippen cones. I will show you a picture of what that looks like later, and a few small metal objects associated with this phase, chisels. So I don't have time today to review all the evidence or all the dates or all the features that change between Middle and Late Chalcolithic, but I'm going to highlight a few key points so we can sort of start to see some nuances around this evidence. The red polished Filia is definitely attested during the Late Chalcolithic, so we have a definite overlap between use and manufacture of Filia material culture and Chalcolithic lifestyles. The red and black stroke burnished ware is the innovative Late Chalcolithic pottery for eating, drinking and serving. And the beauty of this pottery cannot be overstated. The extraordinary hardness of the pots and their super thin walls are undoubtedly intended to give a metallicizing feel. This is made possible by the peculiarity of the Mammonia complex clays located up the Mavrocondas River Valley. As Diane Bolger has discussed, the use of non-calcareous clays to manufacture these vessels with a burnished red-black surface is a radical departure from the coarse calcareous clays used for the painted red-on-white wares of the preceding Middle Chalcolithic. I would also like to note here the important recent research by Maria Hadji-Gavril on the pottery at Chloricas Pelurus. The large storage jar seen here is not red and black stroke burnished, but a fabric identified by Maria as late Chalcolithic red monochrome ware, originating somewhere in the area of Polis and imported to Chloricas. And importantly, she's also concluded that Chloricas was receiving its red and black stroke burnished from Kisonaga, whereas the more utilitarian fabrics and the spoiled ware and the coarse ware were made from similar but different clay sources and presumably by different potters. I have discussed elsewhere that the transformation of pottery technologies and styles to red shiny pottery on Cyprus should be related to the beginnings of Eastern Mediterranean movements seen in the early Transcaucasian phenomenon and indicates the adoption of shared customs around feasting to smooth interactions with strangers around 3000 BC, but that is too far back in time for us today. So chamber tombs I mentioned as filiatric, but they indeed also appear in the late Chalcolithic at Kisonaga Mosfilia. Prior to this, the dead were interred in pit graves within settlements, generally. The 13 chamber tombs of late Chalcolithic Mosfilia are still within the settlement, but important features emerge. Multiple interments, regular pottery grave goods. And Eddie Peltenberg saw a major distinction between Middle Chalcolithic and late Chalcolithic grave goods. Picrolite objects all but vanish, faience beads are deposited with adults, and these new types of vessel types, the red and black stroke burnished wares. And here you can see an interesting possibility where we have the tomb at Kisonaga Mosfilia with this buttress located in the middle. And here the tomb at Filia Tomb 1, with a similar kind of separation between the two lobes of the chambers. Obviously in the Filia proper, there's a lot more grave goods deposited. So coming to textiles. So this top object here, KM 1447, was originally considered a spindle well when excavated, but then dismissed as it was the only one of its kind and thought to be perhaps an aberration. But recently, Giulia Muti has reassessed the textile tools, including bone needles, clay objects, and stone discs. And she has concluded that the characteristics of this object allow for its function as a well, and that the low firing preserved in this exceptional context of the ceremonial area at Kisonaga Mosfilia may indicate these objects were more common than we think, but rarely preserved. Her assessment of Chalcolithic needles indicates a wide range of thread weights were in use, and probably primarily from flax. Flax can be spliced or spun, and spinning technologies were already likely in use. The pierced stone objects you see here are also able to function as whirls. So the earliest example we see is, in fact, the end of the Middle Chalcolithic at Kisonaga Mosfilia. And we turn to the late Chalcolithic evidence, then we get our first clear typological examples of clay spindle whirls that we expect and that begin now and last through the early Middle Cypriot into the beginning of the late Cypriot. Terracotta whirls found in period 4 again within the late Chalcolithic strata and in the 5 filial levels at Mosfilia. The earliest examples is the top right example from period 4, and again, it's an import from the northwest filial heartland of a classic filial type whirl. The one in the bottom left is a local product and found in period 4 late context. So we have 4 filial northwestern examples and 2 local products occurring in this assemblage already. And Muti has linked the lightweight and narrow diameter of the earliest examples to the spinning of short fibres, most likely wool. Use of bast fibres did continue throughout the Bronze Age, as seen in the mineralized fabrics which adhered to bronzes she examined in tombs. So therefore, whilst these objects appear to be connected to an introduced technology of spinning, local populations were quite likely already spinning, and they adapted their pre-existing motor technique skills to new material of wool, facilitated by the introduction of woolly sheep with the filial. The classic filial object is the spurred annular pendant, well known to have similarities to Aegean and Anatolian types, but also uniquely Cypriot. You can see a large example from filial in the top, and then the little smaller examples that we have retrieved from Kisonaga Scalia, 2 picrolite and 1 shell. Turning to period 5, We can see, unfortunately, we're in the plough zone, as I mentioned, and we do see from period 4 to 5 a massive increase in the amount of red polished filial and also this black slip and coned wear. You can see that the red polished filial is in this site plan here, most frequent above building 86, building 3 area, and otherwise is scattered throughout here, but low numbers except in a few areas. And there are also 51 cattle bones, and this might not seem terribly many, but Paul Croft analysed this as 7% of the period 5 faunal assemblage. So we do have cows occurring with the fine wear potteries in the final phase. We also see these pithos burials, but importantly, 2 examples are not in the imported filial pottery, but are occurring in local red and black stroke burnished jars. And there are a few new types of bins, ovens, pits that occur in the just at the bottom of the plough zone. So a little bit more metal is occurring, 1 axe, 1 spiral earring, this example here, and attributed to period 4/5. And I have to note, this season, we also retrieved one of these filial earrings, but found on a final phase NC3 LC1 floor. Someone must have picked it up and had it hundreds of years later. So, summarizing here, we have annular pendants and imported spindle wells within earlier period 4, chamber tombs by mid-period 4, northwestern filial pottery appears during period 4B, along with local wells and copper tools. Northwestern filial material plus cattle, metal, and jar burials in period 5. So the timelines of the different materials appearing, you can see, despite this fairly minimal evidence, that there do seem to be some changes. What is key is that both red and black stroke burnished and red polished filial place emphasis on storage and serving and consumption, as you can see here with the elegant pouring spouts. I'm taking a little sidestep to our neighbours in Chloricas Pelurus now to highlight a few more objects. This very important assemblage found at Chloricas, this jar that you can see here was found containing this imported copper base axe, a stone axe in the same shape as imitating a metal axe, and some boar tusk hooks, and a nice tight radiocarbon date, 2600 BC, which we're lacking from Kisonaga. Very different in style to the typical late Chalcolithic whole-mouth storage jars that you can see from Lemba and Kisonaga Mosfilia here, but strikingly similar to a storage jar found in Filial Tomb 1. And if, as Maria has decided, this jar is in fact from around the Polis area somewhere, perhaps there are different things going on in the North Coast that are more connected with the Filial heartland. And another interesting aside, going all the way to Filial, Raphael Lautari has found no less than 3 Chalcolithic vessels in Filial tombs at Filial. And again, you can really see that these are functionally equivalent vessels, these spouted bowls, identical features, even if the style and the technology is somewhat different. And again, just to show you what Filial Tomb 1 looks like. So let's turn to Kisonaga Scalia. And we highlight here the top area that you can see. That upper V should be the area that is overlapping with Kisonaga Mosfilia. And in that upper area, you can perhaps make out on the site plan that we have these yellow circles, which mark the location of Chalcolithic pit graves. And we have the tops of the graves, we have the cut, there's no grave goods, there's some Middle Chalcolithic pottery, and it does appear to be an off-site Middle Chalcolithic burial area. So the settlement of Mosfilia does not seem to have been extending down this far, but they certainly were using this piece of land. So I'll take a look at a few areas of the site where we have investigated earlier deposits. Up in the north here, we're next to one of our pyrotechnical features. Some of them are going forward. Am I going forward or back? Oh, sorry, going back rapidly. Here we are. So up in the north, next to one of our pyrotechnical features, in the center in our large open space, and down south in our area where we have preserved a Filial architectural array and an early middle Cypriot sequence. Most of what you see here in black is our final phase complex, which is an industrial facility dating to the transition from the Middle to the Late Bronze Age, we don't have any evidence of domestic occupation in that final phase. So we come upon this feature here, this large, very poorly built, with just a single row of stones, pyrotechnical feature found full of ash and debris and various bits and pieces. The Middle Cypriot 3 to Late Cypriot 1 people at Kisonaga had cut off earlier deposits in the north area of the site. So we have, in fact, only 5 to 10 centimeters of stratigraphy between what is this wavy line here, a late Chalcolithic mud plastered curb, which seems to contain only late Chalcolithic material, and then what appears to be perhaps a small hob of some sort, and this surface with a pitscape. The pits contain a mixture of Filial and early Cypriot 1 to 2 material. So this is very thin stratigraphy, it's quite difficult, but we certainly have not answered our questions in this area. Coming to the center of the site, in area B3, we had investigated here because we had this wall stub sticking up through the final phase floors. We investigated down, found a secondary wall that you can see horizontal in the center there, and a series of pits and surfaces, which again, we investigated and found a mixture of late Chalcolithic stone discs, early Filial, local production spindle wells, and clear EC1 to 2 spindle well type, along with some groundstone tools. So again, this is not really resolving our issues, but what is important in these early areas is we do not find the usual array of a mix of Middle Chalcolithic and Neolithic and everything material. It seems to be a new establishment, perhaps late Chalcolithic, perhaps a little bit later in this area. This is where our lovely, beautiful actual architecture lies, in the south of the site. And here you can see these very nicely built walls, 60 centimeters, very narrow, instead of our usual 80 centimeter wide early Middle Cypriot proper walls, plaster floors, very nice plaster features, which we do not see in our later early Middle Cypriot architecture above this, and objects such as annular pendants and this picrolite object, which is a labret or an earring. No parallels on Cyprus, but it does have a parallel of some kind in Anatolian contexts. And here within this, we have in a pit located up here, built into the wall, and in a pit located down here, a true northwestern Filial neck juglet, which is a strange thing whereby they took the neck of what should have gone on to a regular sized jug, and instead of putting a jug body, they just sealed off the bottom and made it into a juglet. So we have one of our northwestern imports, and we have a local production example. And we also have a range of imported northwestern Filial spindle wells in the top and local production examples down below. So what is happening at Kisonaga Scalia in contrast to Kisonaga Mosfilia is we're seeing that our potters are really engaging with this material and actively trying to imitate the Filial styles. We have our red polished Filial proper here, and then we have, using our local clays, what they're attempting to make this pale surface, but doing things in Filial style, but with the local clay, it doesn't really get as red and as shiny. We have imported black slip and coned. We have local production black slip and coned, again of this much sort of coarser clay body. And then we have wares not attested at Mosfilia, such as the white painted Filial you see up there, and Filial cook pot, and also local attempts at band burnishing or stroke burnishing. Then rereading the other day, Graham Phillips' survey report in the RDAC on the survey pottery from Kisonaga Scalia, which was undertaken as part of Eddie Peldenberg's work at Mosfilia, revealed that Graham had named one of the wares degenerate red and black stroke burnished ware. And he described this as resembling red and black stroke burnished ware at Kisonaga Mosfilia, with angular black and red, up to 5mm inclusions visible on the surface. It also had a grooved form of burnishing and use restricted to large vessels. He said obviously close links to red and black stroke burnished, but not used for the small, fine, common vessels. And I'm not going to be using that term to describe this pottery. It is clear that the same clay sources are being exploited from the Chalcolithic to the Bronze Age, and that the earliest forms are almost identical to red and black stroke burnished fabric, but imitating these new shapes and decorative techniques whilst changing tempering methods. Potters began to include mudstone instead of crusted chert, and the variety of inclusions increases. these connections that we have with other areas of the island continue throughout the early Cypriot 1 to 2. In this pit, dug 2 floors above the filial, have a nice complete earlug jar, which should be from the south coast area. And these spindle wells you see are absolutely at home in Venus or other north coast sites. And again, this trait continues of these imported goods are coming in and our local potters are very quickly trying to keep up and make the same styles. Nice northern tulip bowl, black top, red polished in the top. Again, we have tulip bowls down the bottom there as well. And this is something that appears across the island, as Georgiou and Webb and Frankel have shown in their work at Pseumatos Menos. There were also local tulip bowls being produced there. So the majority of our local wares begin to resemble drab polished ware. We feel we can call this early drab polished, but we also have things that are strikingly top right, imitating red polished south coast. And then we have imports of brown polished mottle ware and a flask neck down the bottom. Through time, from the fully formed early Cypriot, middle Cypriot date, our clays become more refined. They have a finish that becomes either a red polished or a drab polished finish, but it is basically the same thing. It's just degrees of redness or drabness. And we do not have much in the way of decoration, but our local style, you can see here, is a lot of impressed circles with interior motifs and some relief bands. So they're still using these same ammonia clays. They're preparing the fabric much more efficiently, and their firing is much more refined. And for coarser vessels, mudstone tempering remains used. For finer vessels, you could pick up a sherd of this and think it might be Roman. In the final phase, we have a whole new network of connections going on as attested in the pottery. We have still the drab polished kicking around, but the urge now is for the potters to try and create black surfaces like the black slipware and the darker surfaces that come in the middle Cypriot 3. And we have other things going on in the island, the odd imported bit of white painted ware you can see in the top right. We have the introduction of the multi-pronged decorative combing tool, which appears around the island. We have the introduction in the bottom left of black reserved slipware, an aberration, but it does appear to be manufactured locally pretty much all over the island. And we see red polished ore in the bottom there, which is grittier, sandier, does not appear to be local to the site and appears to be coming from somewhere else. So I would like to now turn to think about engagement with the sea, given that we are in the prime coastal location of Kasonga, and the fact that we know that Eastern Mediterranean trade is escalating during Middle Cypriot 3, and that Cyprus was taking part in these exchanges. And the question is, did the community at Kasonga also participate in these maritime connections? Well, most of our evidence comes in the form of marine shells. And Kasonga Scagliar has produced 6,406 fragmentary and whole marine shells to date, although these do await expert study to be able to categorize them properly. But we can compare this to the 999 shells collected from Kasonga Mosfilia, published by Janet Riddart Sharp, and it seems we can see a considerable leap in marine shell exploitation from the Chalcolithic to the Bronze Age. And this clearly indicates a deep engagement with at least the seashore. So I'm going to explore a little in the following section how shells were used in the Bronze Age for tools, for ornaments, as well as the obvious food source and other uses. We have retrieved 81 small finds made from marine shells to date. 5 can be classified as tools, such as the ladle handle that you can see here, which has a hole drilled, and you can imagine the insertion of a wooden stick would make that a very fine spoon. And the remainder are classified as personal ornaments. We do have a number of dentalium shell beads, and they're classified as beads if there's evidence of working, just classified as shells. If there is not, we have 41 actual beads, but they're generally single examples, and we're assuming that they're residual from Mosfilia, as dentalium shell does not seem to have been so appealing to people in the Bronze Age. And we also have very little in the way of trident shell, despite the fact that it seems to have been very important to earlier Chalcolithic people. And there are 15 generic bivalve or conical shells, which appears to be worn as pendants, but these are very difficult to date. And I will come to our only diagnostic type shortly. So fish bone evidence is extremely limited, but may be related to taphonomic processes. And alternatively, as was traditional in Kisonaga village in recent times, it was common to fish on the shore and immediately barbecue and consume the catch on the spot. And this also goes for mollusk consumption. Whelks and limpets can be eaten raw, pried from the rocks and removed with a stick for immediate snacks. As at Kisonaga Mosfilia, we have a little cuttlefish, a few sea urchin spines, and a number of crab claws, although these require study to ascertain if they are marine or freshwater. Now I'm going to turn to limpets, and I'm afraid I've gone down rather a rabbit hole with limpets, not least because they're easy for me as a non-specialist to identify, but also because we seem to have some strange things going on with limpets at the site. Luckily, I found an article by someone who is also obsessed, and this has been a great help in considering the possibilities of limpet use. So limpets and top shells, such as whelks, are the most common types at both Mosfilia and Scalia. At Mosfilia, both occur in low numbers, in numbers of samples, and are assumed to have been used as food. Redoubt Sharp also notes that the Kisonaga Mosfilia limpets were generally undersized and that they may have been overexploited. And you can see here that the Scagliara examples are also typically small, 1 to 2 centimeters, so this appears also to be the case for during the Bronze Age. As I mentioned, we do have one diagnostic marine shell ornament that seems to occur only in Bronze Age contexts. And these are worked limpet shells, always with 2 holes drilled from the exterior of the shell, parallel at the narrow end, except for this one example you can see here with 5 holes drilled. And they're larger than the unworked shells, and we have found 20 whole or fragmentary examples to date. They're usually found in fill deposits, and I cannot find any parallels for these in the literature. So we have been classifying them as pendants, but it has to be said that they are not the most glamorous jewellery. It seems likely that they had a specific function and meaning, and this would be perhaps further explored. So the double piercing suggests more than simple suspension, rather than they were to be affixed to something. Whilst clothing is a possibility, Firth's article offers an intriguing ethnographic and historic source. Traditionally in Northern Europe, limpet shells were used by nursing mothers as nipple shields to collect leaking milk and to soothe and protect sore and cracked nipples. Sadly, we do not find them in pairs. The limpets are widely considered a symbol of tenacity due to their ability to stick to rocks, so these may have also been worn as apotropaic devices for strength or healing purposes. And the large size of the worked examples in comparison with the smaller unworked ones suggests that these were curated and valued objects, whether for practical or symbolic reasons or both. So in addition to our 20 large work limpets, there are a number of significant deposits located around the different areas of the final phase complex. Here you can see 26 marked in the oval on the plan of our beer courtyard, and a further 93 were found in the partially ploughed disturbed fill above this surface. You can see in the top right the locations of the other significant deposits. These numbers are significant for us, but of course are nowhere near the massive shell deposits found at later sites in the region, for example, the Murex at Habasukun-Teke. So the question is, why are they depositing numbers of these fairly small limpets? Why are some whole, some fragmented, and some fragments burnt? At a basic level, even though often considered a famine food in historical level contexts, limpets are extremely rich in protein and nutrients. So we can consider some of the possibilities of limpets as ingredients. And in beer production, traditional and historical evidence indicates use of shells in clarifying the brew and the inclusion of shellfish meat for a delicious tasting beer. In perfume, I was surprised to learn that it's also the shell is used as an ingredient, apparently similar to musk in perfume making. And for bait, historical Scottish sources indicate that even when they're used for bait, they were brought back to the sediment and parboiled to make them easier to remove from the shell before being taken back to the sea for fishing. The medicinal properties are many. The first article notes that in ancient Greece, limpets were consumed in a broth as a laxative, although you can imagine that any dodgy shellfish would probably do that job. In England, raw limpets and snails were recommended for bronchitis, and in the Scottish Western Isles, limpets were parboiled in water and consumed by poorly nourished nursing mothers to increase milk supply, as well as used to apply treatments to cure sciatica and as receptacles for herbal remedies attached to the skin. Nacre is the iridescent inner surface of many mollusks, including some varieties of limpets. Nacre enhances tissue growth, bone tissue bonding, and nacre powder promotes skin wound healing. It was often dissolved in a vinegar acidic solution for consumption or application, or used in powder form. And there's also traditional use of nacre as a sedation and tranquilization agent and as an anticonvulsant. So here you can also see, located on the floor plan, we have 3 juglets, which I will turn to shortly. And here, one of the very few primary contexts for one of the large worked limpet shells. So Chrysonicus gallagher has yielded more juglets in final occupation strata at the site than we would normally expect, as greater association of juglets is usually seen in mortuary contexts. And despite the diversity in form, skill in execution and style, they're all local red polished, drab polished or black slipwares. The majority have cutaway spouts, but there are also some examples with round mouths. No residue analysis has been undertaken as yet, but as we have deposited these with the interior unwashed in Paphos Museum, then this is something that is certainly possible in the future. It does seem to be that the industrial facilities at Chrysonicus gallagher were manufacturing something that was either to be placed in juglets or for mortuary use or trade, or there was an ingredient within the juglets that was used in the process of manufacturing the substance. So perfumes, medicines, or a special yeast mixture for beer manufacture, or something of this nature. And it's quite possible that limpet meat or shell was an ingredient in this process. So we do not have much in the way of fish bones, but we do have the only known copper fish hooks of the entire early Middle Cypriot Bronze Age, and these are shown here. The 2 on the left were retrieved in early seasons, and the 2 on the right just this summer. They're awaiting conservation, very kindly being undertaken by Eleni Lozidu and her team at the Department of Antiquities for eventual display in the New Cyprus Museum. The left-hand one is already on display in the Paphos Museum. All were retrieved in the same area of the site, in Area D for the first 2 examples, and Area Q just this year. All are from deposits predating the final phase complex, and certainly no later than NC2, quite possibly earlier. And it's interesting that we seem to have found 2 sets. You can see 2 squatter, smaller examples and 2 larger, elongated examples. And what is interesting is the S-shaped profile, and I cannot find any parallels in the region at this time for this. The only parallel until much later in the late Cypriot is this hook from an NC3 LC1A tomb at Turbatus Guru, and you can see the loop at the top bends forwards towards the hook, unlike our examples. So despite our lack of fish remains, it seems clear that the community at Chrysonicus gallagher was exploiting marine resources. The only other tantalizing clue regarding this is stable isotope analysis of human remains from the Chrysonica and Muthia Cemetery, undertaken by Lisa Graham for her PhD on the site, which indicated some consumption of marine resources. We have other hints from far away, whether across the sea or the other end of the island, shown in the introduction of some of these new pottery wares. Plain white handmade pithoi, technologically identical to those found in the Kaupas and the Far East, at Enkmi, Nitavikla, sites like this, and our wheel-made vessels. This is our most complete example, and this is imitating a Canaanite jar. It's not a Cypriot type. It's very badly made. The handles have fallen off, and they had to bind it up with string to support it whilst it was drying. But we have evidence of new technological skills here, so not just the copying of pots. We have perhaps itinerant potters, or perhaps people moving around the island. And also, strangely, in the final phase complex, we start to get Kaupas-style spindle wheels appearing, which are distinctive again at sites such as Nitavikla. And also associated with the final phase, we have our pit with cattle skulls, and these are associated with a pit that was dug with construction of the final phase complex. And they're not complete, there's no mandible or teeth. They have been shaped, and they're either shaped for wearing as masks or for hanging on walls. And along with our little cattle figurine found deposited on the base of a pyrotechnical feature, we can certainly say that cattle, after their introduction, remained important symbols all through the Bronze Age. Our formal data is sadly not adequate to be able to see if we can see any appearances or change through time at this stage. So, returning to our themes, can we have any clearer idea of the transformations between the Chalcolithic and the Bronze Age in the locality of Chrysonica? Well, the completely secure Casonica period 4 innovation is the replacement of painted pottery with the red and black stroke burnished, shiny, red, thin-walled eating and drinking vessels. And this is already radical, but it is not filial. Slightly post-dating this, we see imports of filial, shiny red finewares at the site. We see new personal ornaments, new textile technologies, and the evidence is not quite clear enough to state that imported spindle wheels appeared first, but they certainly were quickly manufactured in local clays. Perhaps we see new metal technologies and at least imported metal goods. During period 5, we can see increased connections and exchange of goods as well as the cattle. And we have to concede that the introduction of cattle, donkeys, and other new animals is also very radical. And if we consider the evidence robust enough from Casonica to imagine that the cows came first, then this is really significant and life-changing for local communities. The introduction of the cow will have required instruction, interaction to ensure success, unless, of course, they just ate all the first cows. Hopefully, we'll be able to understand this a little bit better with some more excavation of early deposits. Can we obtain a nuanced understanding of developments through time? Well, the blurriness of the Mosfilia and Scalia assemblages currently is not so helpful, so we have to keep looking. And are the people living at Scalia the descendants of those living at Mosfilia? I would suggest that the adoption of local innovations in burial, in technology and style, material culture at both Casonica Mosfilia and at Casonica Scalia in these early deposits, using clearly local traditions, argues yes, but can't really prove it, I guess. And what is the evidence for local resource exploitation and interactions with others? Well, clearly the people of Casonica made the most of their land and their sea resources, successfully living in one place for around about or more than 5,500 years, adapting and adjusting as times changed. They remained connected, doubtless over land, and also most likely by sea. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, dear Lindy. Congratulations for this wonderful presentation. We are very happy listening from you, an excavator or the excavator of Scalia. Not only the results from Scalia, but the fact that